again, everybody. Welcome to the Bruce Starr Show. I am so excited about this show that we're going to do today because every once in a while, we get back to doing a show about my first love. And my first love has always been the entertainment industry, show business. I've been in and out of the business since 1993. And in 86, what am I talking about, 93? In 81, I moved out to Los Angeles, where I became a talent agent and manager and started hanging around with a bunch of guys, Bruce Smirnoff and Goldstein. I'd love to talk about Goldstein.
Sure.
And actually Billy Rebeck, who went on to do quite a bit. And it was an amazing time because with my luck in 81, the golden age of comedy just exploded right in front of my eyes. And the reason was that the Evening at the Improv, the television show Evening at the Improv, started airing not only everywhere in the country, but certainly in Canada and maybe even across the world. It was an amazing time. And I was a talent agent and manager. Barry Martyr was my roommate. I don't know if you probably remember that. Or
Oh, sure. I remember Barry Martyr.
okay.
Sure.
He wrote a lot of comedy for a lot of people. So we were roommates for 2 or 3 years. And it was like Muck and Meyer and the Odd Couple living together. But I credit him with showing me the business because I was a real greenie. I was a guy from Boston who had stars in my eyes and I wanted to get into the business. And Barry really showed me the way. So Barry was one of those guys that we hung out with. I could just see us standing in that middle area. To the left is the bar, straight ahead is the runway to the main room, and the right to where we sat and had pizza. Sure. With Jackie Mason and, you name it, all those people that came in, Bruce Willis.
Sure.
But Barry and Bruce knew everybody because Barry wrote for everybody and Bruce he was out there enough years. And they started introducing me to guys. And one of the guys they introduced me to was David Wood. I got to see him perform on Evening at the Improv, got to see him perform all the time on stage at the Improv. So we have not really talked, this is incredible. We haven't probably talked in, 40 years maybe, something like that?
No, quite a long time. So. So funny. It's so funny saying it. It's like we just talked yesterday. It's such a weird dynamic. But.
And you look great. You look exactly the way you did 40 years ago, which is amazing. I know, thank God, I haven't aged that poorly and probably look, generally the same. But David was one of the nice guys. He just was a nice guy. He wasn't someone that, that after you talk to him, he wasn't going to go talk behind your back or say anything trashy or put you down in any way. He was one of the great guys. And I think that's what gravitated me to working with him and asking him if he wanted to allow me to try to book him around the country. So, David, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm really excited to have you.
Oh, what a pleasure. It's so great to see you, man. And it brings back so many memories. And it's so funny. You brought up Jackie Mason. And Jackie Mason, I just remember this. He did like a 2-week stint at the Improv where he performed every night. And Jackie Mason was such a genius at it. I mean, it was a genius. And he would go on stage and he would do these little lulls in between. And I thought, what is he doing? And I realized he had to let the audience rest because they were laughing so much. And Jackie Mason is so funny. He saw me perform one. I think I went on before him. And he comes up to me and he says, I can't do impressions. He goes, you got that Gentile soft sell. He says, you use anything you want of mine. No problem. Like I could use one of Jackie Mason's bits, He's doing this great bit. I'm sorry I'm reminiscing about this, but about the difference between Gentile and Jewish vacations. It was like, the Gentiles, they're jumping, they're laughing, they're hitting, they're running. You know, the Jews, they sit in the lobby, they go from this chair to that chair. I'm going to have lunch in a bit. And it was like, it was just so fantastic to be around somebody. He was just a genius. I mean, just a genius.
And do you remember when he was doing something with Bud? Maybe you remember, but he was like, I think he was going to buy into the restaurant area, or he did buy into the restaurant
Yeah, that
area.
could be. I don't quite remember. But then when Mark Lano came in, I don't know if you remember, Mark Lano and his wife Joanne Astro came in.
Yeah, we did a show together, just so
wonderful.
you know.
I mean, I just think the world of them. And then all of a sudden, the Improv with, you know, being run even better as a business, even at the Improv, like you said, made them like, you know, universally known. And then the Improv just exploded. And you had so many great performers, Leno and Seinfeld and Robin Williams. And, you know, and I got to watch them, not only perform with them, I got to watch them like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. And it was just it was just fantastic looking back at it.
Some of my daily memories was of Jay spinning down from the Comedy Store on his motorcycle after doing a set there, coming down and doing a set at the Improv, and doing that every single day that he could.
Oh, he performed every day. And by the way, in those days, he was one of the few performers that performed at both clubs, the Improv and the Comedy Store. Very few people did both. You either were a Comedy Store comedian or an Improv comedian, and I was an Improv comedian. So he was one of the few. Robin did it. Letterman was a Comedy Store guy, but he did the Improv like maybe once or twice. But it was Leno always did both.
So tell me what year. I got there in 81, like I said, just before that whole, I mean, the golden age just exploded right in front of my eyes.
Sure.
And when did you get there?
Well, I got there, I actually was going to go to law school, but dropped out on that opportunity to become a comedian. So, of course, my mother was very proud. But, you know, I did it. I did a talent show in college. I don't even know how I got the guts. I went up and did it in front of 800 people and said, okay, I'm going to LA. And I didn't even realize you could go somewhere and get good first. I just went right to LA. And I went out there in, I think, late 1978. And then I started hanging around the Improv and the Comedy Store. And then I worked at the Improv as a doorman.
Right.
And that led me to Bud Friedman, who was the owner of the Improv, I would MC the show late at night, or if somebody didn't show up, he'd stick me up there. And that's how I got, you know, I started to get stage time and get better, just was through, you know, in essence, osmosis of being around those great comedians and that vibe. So I consider myself very lucky.
You know, that reminds me, one of the great memories there were times when Robin would kind of, you know, dash his way into the Improv whenever it was, 10:30, 11 o'clock, and basically go on stage. And some of the guys might not have liked that, but that's just the way it was. And if they got there around 11:30, 12, Overton would go on with him. And
right, that's right. I remember that.
They would carry on. I've had Rick on my show several times since then. Sure. What a great guy.
Oh, what a talent. What an incredible talent.
And as a matter of fact, I had Ricky on the show about 2 weeks after Robin passed.
Wow. Very sad.
And he was Robin's best friend.
You know, it was weird. I will say this, is that, you know, I used to look at Robin, like when I went to LA, he became a star like that day on Mork and Mindy. It was like, wow. I mean, it was like, I had heard about him, and all of a sudden Robin Williams was a megastar. And so Robin used to, you know, all the comedians hung out at the Improv, whether you worked the stage or not. That was the hangout, was the Improv, because they had a restaurant, right? And you could go hang out in the restaurant. And I remember that, you know, and nobody is more different on stage and off stage than Robin Williams. I mean, I don't think that's a secret. I mean, Robin was so different. So quiet. I don't think it would be shocking to people. And I remember thinking that he's a superstar already. And I remember thinking that, man, that doesn't look like fun. You know what I mean? And Robin always had that air about him, that little bit of sadness, for lack of a better word. I mean, and to be that talented. I mean, that just overwhelmingly talented. I mean, But I don't know. It was very sad. I mean, I certainly followed his career and just adored him like everybody else.
He was compared to Jonathan Winters a lot.
Well, and he was influenced by Jonathan Winters. He always recognized that. But I mean, he was a genius. I mean, who even knows what that was? That was crazy talent.
And when you first came to town, and we talked about the Improv and the Comedy Store, and I was mostly an improv guy because that's where someone plopped me on the doorstep and pushed me in and said, oh, you want to be in the business? Go in here and ask for Bruce Smirnoff.
Well, Bruce was a sweet guy. Bruce was such a sweet guy. And, we all hung out there. And not only did comedians hang out there, but people like you who wanted to be in the business side of things.
Managers, producers, directors, casting,
everybody, actors would hang out there. So it was a full scene. And it was a lot of fun. I think we kind of got the best of it, to be honest with you.
Absolutely.
That was the exciting time.
Oh, do you remember Monday nights there when the Mark and Bud were saying, Monday night is so dead. What can we do to create some interest? So they started playing music. They spread out the tables, and it was dance night, Hollywood dance night. You remember that?
I do. I do.
Oh my God, the people that walked in there those nights. I mean, Bruce Willis. I remember Bette Midler walked in
everybody
with a sweatshirt on, sweatpants, they say schmata over her head.
Sure.
Nobody even recognized her, no makeup. And she was just in there standing around, looking and watching. But, Michael J. Fox. And
Cher was in there one night. I was like, wow, look at that.
I missed that.
Cher hanging around. No. Oh. Yeah, Cher was I think she did a show with Rick Podell.
Oh, my God.
They came in there together. If I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong about that, but that's something in the back of my aged mind.
And the thing that I remember that stands out, because it was just, it was right there in your face, is when Johnny used to come in a little drunk. Maybe he'd come and sit in the main room, but he'd go right to the bar.
Sure.
And he'd get drunk.
Yeah, I think we all we'd all had some fun in the Improv. There was a lot of fun to be had.
But Johnny Carson,
getting
drunk at the Improv at the bar was, I don't know, it was a little bit, I don't know what it was. It was disappointing or whatever it was for me.
It's a tough business, right? It's so funny. I was a huge tennis fan, still am a crazy tennis fan. And I used to buy a season ticket every year for the LA tournament, the tennis tournament, which is held at UCLA. And I would go to every match. I would sit there like an idiot. And so on the first day of the week of tournament, it'd be like 1 p.m. And Johnny would be, and he was a tennis fan, and Johnny would be on the other side and I'd be on this side. And I always thought it was so cool that I'd see Johnny across the way. And there'd only be like, a couple hundred people there that early in the day and that early in the week. But I used to see Johnny, and it was so weird. Johnny would go get something to eat at the concession stands, right? And I remember, I'll never forget this. He was sitting on a ledge by himself. Johnny Carson is eating a sandwich out of this tray that he got. And people would see Johnny Carson, but he had this air about him that you wouldn't approach him. You wouldn't go, hey, Johnny, how are you? Like you would for basically anybody else. But with Carson, you just would like, oh, that's Johnny Carson. You would like kind of walk away, be interested, but he just had this whole veneer about him, this, that you just couldn't get through. And it was fascinating. I mean, he was the greatest. I mean, who are we kidding?
Wow. Things have changed quite a bit since the days that he was on TV, because everybody was up late watching him.
Oh, he was the master. I mean, you could just see how, even Letterman, who another genius at broadcasting. I mean, those two guys knew how to broadcast. They knew they were working in a box. They weren't comics on television. They were just funny on television, and they just knew how to work within the confines of that box, which most people don't know how to do. Most people can't do it. I think it's very hard.
Who's someone else that could do that?
There's not been many. Carson, I mean, the great broadcasters, really, Carson, Letterman, Howard Stern, just knows how he's the epitome of a broadcaster. I mean, as far as talk show hosts, I mean, Bill Maher is, a genius. But again, Bill Maher has many of the same mannerisms, which he says of Carson, very much like Carson. So, I mean, not to be critical, but I mean, very few people understood that, understood that they're in that box, in that eye. And, and Carson had all kinds of gigs before he did that. Letterman was the same, he was a weatherman. So they understood the camera as opposed to just being a comic on TV. Shanley was great at it. Better than Gary Shanley. I mean, wow. I mean, and I was lucky. Gary was very kind to me. I used to do the warm up for It's Gary Shandling show for several years, and they even put me on the show as myself, as a comedian myself on the show. So, I mean, I couldn't be, I loved Gary Shandling. He was funny. Very few comedians are actually funny. You know what I mean? Like all the time. Shandling was funny. I mean, he was the best.
You know who else was a funny one? He used to take me on the road, Barry and I, was Murray. Murray.
You talking about Murray Langston?
Yeah.
Oh, he was fun. Now, he was, again, naturally funny.
On all the time.
Right. But I used to tell people would always ask me, what's it like, hanging around these people? And I always used to say, like, if you're at a table and it's, even if it's Jay and David Letterman, and even, I mean, you'd be surprised how it wasn't that funny. I mean, these were serious people, who turned it on camera, but they were more cerebral about it. So, but Shanley could be funny. Shanley could talk in jokes where you didn't even realize, is he like doing his act or is he just talking to me, right? But yeah, there was, I mean, and Murray Langston, again, very funny human being, really funny.
Shanley had one of those faces that when he spoke, he had a smile on his face.
Sure.
You didn't know whether he was saying a joke, being funny, or
right.
he was just great that way.
And by the way, we're talking about the difference between the Comedy Store and the Improv, where, Gary could not get on at the Comedy Store. As somebody as talented as Gary Shandling was not a regular at the Comedy Store. Mitzi Shore, the owner, and who made all the decisions, just didn't care for him. So, I mean, I always found that amazing, Gary Shandling. And I used to go to other clubs in LA, these terrible dives where they'd have comedy night. And I would see Gary Shandling, who was already established then. He was writing for television shows, had a nice car. And I used to watch him go, wow, he looks so successful, And he wasn't a big stand-up, but he was so great. And he just persevered and just worked. And, I just have the highest admiration for Gary Shandling.
We started talking about the Improv and the Comedy Store. Something pretty controversial went down there right before I got there. And apparently, while you were there, can you tell me about the strike and that whole thing that was created there, and
Sure.
the emotions and all the bad feelings that came out of it?
Well, it was terrible. I mean, it was around 1980, I want to say. It was just after I got to LA. And basically, the comedians weren't getting paid. I mean, the whole notion was that it was like going to the gym, in essence, but you could get discovered. You could work on your act and build an act. And, obviously, the Comedy Store was making a lot of money. Improv was making money. Not as much as the Comedy Store, but, the comics wanted to get paid. And so the comics went on strike. And they struck against both the Comedy Store and the Improv. And it was a big thing. And that really divided the lines even more, where you became a Comedy Store comedian or a improv comedian. And it got a bit out of hand, and somebody committed suicide. A young comedian jumped off the building next to the Comedy Store. And it was just a terrible time. And I was so naive and young and dumb. I was just, I didn't know what to do. I was just looking around and trying not to get in anybody's way and trying to understand it. And then it all dissipated. And then, comedians started getting paid. You wouldn't get much, but it helped, You'd get $35, $50 a set, and then you'd get a check, which was, wow, this is fantastic. You're getting paid to tell jokes. But it was a scary time. But, I think it only lasted, I want to say it lasted a few months, but maybe it lasted longer. But in my mind, it seemed like only a few months.
So as what happens from time to time when there is a strike, some people respected the strike and others saw it as a sort of as an opportunity for them to
Captain,
step up and step ahead. Tell me a little bit about that.
You know, I remember a guy, I remember like Yakov Smirnov,
Yeah.
where he basically, some comedians kept performing, in essence, breaking the strike. And maybe they did benefit from that. I don't know. I don't really know, to be honest with you, but it was a weird, weird time. And, you know, and in a way, I was glad I wasn't established, because it didn't affect me that much, only in that I just got to see it. You know, and there were big leaders. You know, Tom Dreesen was a great leader in that whole campaign, and you know, it was fascinating. It was fascinating looking back on it, but it was scary at the time, very scary.
Were you, I remember when I was out there in the early 80s, and I can't remember who this was, but somebody used to tell me that they used to go over to Stan Laurel's house in Santa Monica.
Hmm.
That wasn't you.
No, it wasn't me, but
Could
you know,
you imagine?
oh yeah, I can't even. Yeah, exactly. Well, I'll tell you this: Buddy Hackett, somehow I think he became friends with one of my friends, and I'm sure your friend Will Schreiner, who was
Will is down here in Florida.
yeah, that's right. And you know, Will was one of my best friends in LA, and Buddy Hackett through Will, I believe, had a bunch of us would go to his house, and we would have lunch, and he would talk about comedy. And it was so funny. I'll never forget. It was in Beverly Hills, and I'm looking at a painting on the wall, and I go, "Oh, I think that's Picasso." Okay. And then Buddy took us to three of us: Eugene Leibowitz, the great comedy writer Eugene Leibowitz, myself, and maybe it was Will. He took us to watch him perform at the I want to say the Sahara, and he would do his show, and then we would come backstage, and he would talk about the show and what he did. So yeah, so we got to see, you know, some of the great, and a lot of the old greats just hung around the Improv too. You'd see them all the time.
Yeah,
You know,
they would come in, and Bud would have them come and host there, which
sure.
was amazing, you know, to see some of the very greats. I remember Phyllis, I've got videos of a lot of those shows actually
Oh,
on
well,
my cassette. I don't know how.
yeah. Joan Rivers did stints where she would do 2 whole weeks at the Improv. I'll never forget seeing the first time Professor Irwin Corey walking into the Improv with the joint in his mouth. I'd never forget that. I'd never seen anybody like smoking a joint like inside, like in a public establishment. But it was so funny.
To go back to Buddy for a second, Buddy introduced my wife's mother to my wife's father, I think up at the Catskills.
Oh, wow, fantastic. I mean, yeah, that's cool. But he was a great joke teller. I mean, oh my gosh. I mean, we saw him do he probably did about an hour and a half. We saw him do 2 shows just completely different, which I think he did that for us just so we could see him. And then he introduced us to Jerry Lewis, who was the opening act for Buddy. And that was amazing because and then we tried to meet Jerry Lewis, but that didn't work out quite so well. So
why didn't that work out?
Well, I don't want to put this as delicate as I can. I mean, Jerry Lewis was not quite as magnanimous off stage as, let's say, Buddy Hackett was. And we were all backstage there, and Buddy Hackett had set it up for us to meet him, and then it didn't work out. And then we went to breakfast the next morning with Buddy Hackett, and he was very upset about that. He was very mad that Jerry Lewis didn't take time to see us. But I'll never forget, Buddy Hackett was a gun person. He had lots of guns. He had antique guns at his house. And we went to breakfast, and there's this big plop on the table, and I went down, and it's like this big, giant, like dirty, hairy gun that he had taken out of his pants, I guess, and set it on the table to be comfortable.
Right before Billy got on the Saturday Night Live, he came and worked out a bunch of characters at the Improv every night.
He was fantastic. I mean, so talented, and not necessarily like a, like a comedian. We were all influenced by, we were all telling jokes fairly quickly, right? You know what I mean? Where Billy would do characters and they're more drawn out and almost dramatic pieces, and then being funny in that. And I remember watching him going, "Well, that's a whole different ballgame there." You got to be really good to do stuff like that.
Yeah, he was really something. So I'm bringing up some of the things I remember. What are some of the things you've brought up? A couple, of course. What are some of the other things that you've brought up that, kind of helps record history? What went on there behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, that maybe not everybody would be aware of?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you one thing is how I became, to become a regular performer at the Comedy Store, at the Improv. That was a big thing, where you graduate from audition night to regular performing on the other nights. And when you become a regular performer, you get like the crap spots. I mean, you're on like at 1 a.m. But when I became a regular at the Improv, and Bud used to draw 10 names out of the hat. Bud Friedman, the owner, would draw 10 names out of a hat, and then 10 acts would go on stage. And I was dead last. And I didn't have much show business savvy, but I went on with my little act and I improvised. I'd never really improvised much, but it was such a terrible situation with no people in the audience. The ones that were there were drunk. And for some reason, I was funny. And I made fun of the situation. And then Bud Friedman said, "Oh, you're very funny, young man. We'd like you to become a regular." So I became a regular. But just some of the nights, I remember Steve Allen, this just came to mind. Steve Allen came to watch the show at the Improv.
Wow.
And Steve Allen had a very distinctive laugh. And I remember being on stage and I'm doing my act, and I was aware that he was in the crowd. You couldn't see the crowd very well, but I was aware of that. And every time I would tell a joke, he was so gracious. He was laughing very loudly at my stuff. And I started just playing for that laugh. I didn't care if anybody else laughed at all, but I could hear Steve Allen's laugh. And
but you know what? I know a lot of the guys did that. A lot of the guys would know everybody's laugh, whether the audience was laughing or not. Those of us that sat in the back of the room, the agents, the managers,
sure,
they knew who was laughing at their jokes.
And by the way, I'll tell you this is really inside, but there used to be a light box, and you could and sometimes the comedians would hang over by the light box, was right by the entrance. And there were comedians who didn't use their own material, if we can put that in a nice way. But the ones that would do it, you could walk to the stage left and they would kind of look over and see who was standing by the light box before they might do a joke of somebody who was standing there. And so, I mean, I remember thinking, "Oh yeah, that's not his, that's not his joke." So, and then one time, I'll tell you another story, is I had to follow Rodney Dangerfield. Rodney goes on and he's just this force of nature. Hey, he goes on and murders. And I'm a young comedian,
Here's young David Wood.
Yeah, here's the next David Wood. And I did the old stupid joke. I went up and said, "I want to thank Rodney Dangerfield for opening for me." And it worked. And then I did great. And I realized is that following great acts isn't as hard as you think, because the audience is already laughing and wants to laugh, right? I mean, so that was a big lesson for me, was not be so intimidated by following somebody great. And so, and he was kind to me too. Rodney was kind to me. He was a character. That dude is a character.
One time, we on a Monday night, and we were at dance night, and Rodney walked in. I think he was by himself. He walked in with a powder blue 2-piece polyester suit on, with white shoes. The place is packed with actors and actresses, and Rodney was coming in to try to get lucky. The only problem was he had this huge chocolate ice cream stain on his jacket.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, Rodney was out there. I don't think, Rodney let it fly pretty good, but one of the most unique characters in comedic history.
He was an inspiration to me because you may or may not know this part. You probably don't. I was there for about 5 years. And then something happened in my life and kind of changed things. I decided I just wasn't happy out there anymore. And I left. And I left for about 10 years. And I remember hearing stories about Rodney leaving show business for 10 years. Did you know that?
I didn't know that, no.
He went back to New Jersey and sold aluminum siding.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow. Wow. I had no idea.
And then he got the bug back, kind of like you were mentioning before the show. He got the bug back, went to probably started open mic nights or whatever it was. And then, of course, everything took off from there. And that was an inspiration to me. I said, if he could come back in 10 years and get anywhere, maybe I can go back there and see if there's a life for me out there. It never worked out for me. And it's kind of interesting now to learn about all the problems that are going on in the entertainment industry, the power people, the people that are really super successful. There's a lot of controversial stuff going on about a lot of the super successful people.
Well, the business sucks. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, so I always thought it was such a, and I always wanted to have great representation, but, it was like, it became like the agents and managers became the star as opposed to the people who were actually on stage doing the work and being creative. And so that dynamic I never liked. I always thought, man, some guy, if you have like you're business savvy and cool and, know how to do it and really help people, that's one thing. But I remember how that whole dynamic changed. And that always turned me off. It's a hard business because it's you're the, we don't want you. You know what I mean? And, I got up for like several times. It'd be like I was up for some big sitcom part. And it would be like, I'd be like in the final 2 or 3. And you're excited to be in the final 2 or 3. But you don't get it. I mean, it's just devastating. I mean, just oh my gosh. You certainly remember the lows, more than you remember the highs. I mean, you could kill, 20 nights in a row and then you have one bad show or whatever. And then, then you think, oh my God, why am I doing this? What am I doing? But I mean, that's just the nature of the business. It's tough. It's a tough game.
Do you remember when Robin got Mork?
Sure.
There was another one of our guys who was up for it also. You remember who at all?
Well, no, I don't remember. Who?
Charlie.
Oh, wow. Wow.
The oddness of Charlie Fleischer.
Well, Charlie Fleischer was odd. I mean, he was really funny. And, and I remember I used to MC a lot. And Charlie would always go way over his time. Way. And other people wanted to perform. You know what I mean? But Charlie, you got to give him credit. He did his own thing. And he was a genius in his way. I mean, there's a guy who I saw, was in close proximity to, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. And I don't think we ever had a conversation. You know what I mean? I don't think we ever had like a normal conversation. Now, he maybe just thought I was some young idiot, which I was. But, most people, even when I'm introducing them, we'd chat a bit. But that wasn't necessarily his way. But a very, very gifted performer.
So who did you get close to? Who could you call your friends?
Well, I guess my best friends looking back on, Will Schreiner was one of my best friends. Like I said, Eugene Leibowitz, who was a very funny comedian, then became a writer. And then I became friends with Henry Cho. Henry Cho was not an improv performer, but a great comedian. He became a great friend of mine. Another guy named Gary Brightwell, he was a Comedy and Magic Club performer, which I used to work a lot down in Hermosa Beach in the Comedy and Magic Club. And that was a great club for me. It was almost more of a real kind of show. And I would perform down there all the time. but I mean, those were and a guy named Mitch Cohen, who was in the business as a manager. They became more my friends. I wasn't the most hang around with comedians kind of a guy. I mean, of course, I was friends with Bruce Smirnoff, great guy. Mark Goldstein, tremendously talented. Kevin Nealon, a little bit. But I kind of did my own thing away from that, and probably to my detriment. I mean, I remember one time Jay Leno, why don't you come up to the house? And for some reason, I just didn't.
Wow.
You know what I mean? I probably should have, but it just wasn't my thing. I like to work and go home, kind of. I like to make it. I tried to make it. I probably made it too normal, but I like that. I like just doing the work and then going.
So what shows did you make it onto? I know you mentioned Letterman and.
I mean, the Letterman show. I did a bunch of Eating at the Improvs. I did a bunch of Merv Griffin shows. I did Comic Strip Live. I did a bunch of those. I did the show they did at. Didn't they do a show at Igby's or something? I did a bunch of those. Yeah, it's Gary Shandling show. I was on that. So I think I probably did. I think I did about 50, 60 TV shows, all in all, of one sort or another, And I hosted some special comedies. I hosted a comedy special in Minnesota where I owned a comedy club for a while called David Wood's Rib Tickler, which was, I always call it the great junior achievement project of all time. And so, it was more stuff like that. But, the big stuff was doing the Letterman show. I mean, that, it made me a comedy headliner in comedy clubs overnight. Diana Ross saw me, invited me to Caesar's Palace. I mean, so that was back then, the old Letterman show, the one that was on after Carson, that was big stuff. I mean, that was, just earth shattering, if you got on there. And I was very lucky.
So one of the great moments, I think we talked about this before, not in the beginning of the show, I don't remember. One of the great moments for me is when I was trying to get you gigs. I think you remember that a little bit.
Yeah, I do.
Well, you got this pretty good gig on your own in Las Vegas from doing Letterman show. You got to open for Diana Ross.
Yeah, that was wild. I mean, I was so excited, and just making my way in show business. And I get this call. I just did the Letterman show. And then I got a call saying, hey, for an attorney working with Miss Ross, you call her Miss Ross, and would you like to open for Diana Ross? And I thought it was a joke, right? I just didn't believe it. But yeah. And it turns out it was true. I went to Caesar's Palace, Las Vegas. Caesar's Palace, that was the place. And it was so weird. When I was there, they were shooting Circus of the Stars. And so all the Circus of the Stars would come to the show. And they're the only people you could see. And I'm up there, I'm nervous, and I'm trying not to get fired, to be honest with you, because sometimes comedians wouldn't work out, and they would, and it was well known, you're gone. They don't mess around in Las Vegas. And so I didn't get fired, thankfully.
How long did you last?
It was a 2-week gig, and I did the 2 weeks, and
wow.
Which 2 shows a night.
Woo.
And I remember looking down, I was performing, I'm nervous, and but it's cool, it's Las Vegas, right? And so I look down, I'd see, oh my God, there's Brooke Shields. Whoa. And then you look down over here and it's like, oh, there's Julio Iglesias. Oh, and it was freaking me out because I kept seeing these people who I know in the front. But it was a great experience.
Can you keep your composure? Can you stay on target when
I did. I was good enough to do that. And I remember there was a clock on stage, and I was doing 18 minutes, and you didn't do 18 minutes and 1 second. You did 18 minutes. And then of course, Miss Ross, Diana Ross, would go on and, of course, kill. I'll never forget it. Backstage, there was a lady who worked with Diana Ross with her wardrobe. And you couldn't see it. It was blocked off, but there was a changing area for Diana Ross, and she would make a quick costume change. And I remember she would throw her dress out of this little curtained area, and the dresses were so heavily with beads that the girl would catch it and she'd fall back 5 yards. And I remember thinking about that, how tough she was to out there, in essence, looking graceful and elegant and everything, but I mean, wearing like a 30-pound dress, and she was great. I mean, she was very kind to me, very, very kind.
Well, I don't know how it happened. I don't know how the timing of this happened, but I was in Las Vegas when you were opening for her, and I went to see you, and you said, "You want to go back and meet Diana Ross?" And I said, "Yeah." And you brought me backstage. I remember her sitting at one of these, she was looking at herself in the mirror and she was
Sure.
semi getting ready, and she could not have been more gracious
Yeah,
and more
she was cool. And then, it's so funny, her band played a softball game against somebody else in Las Vegas, and they invited me to play. And she was there, and she would come, and
oh,
she didn't have to do that, but she was hanging out with the softball team. So she was great. I mean, I was nervous. I got to be honest. I was nervous the whole time. And again, but I made it, got the check, which was, the biggest check I'd ever made at that point for doing stand up. So yeah, that was pretty cool. It's always been a great story that, I love telling. So thank you.
hey, my pleasure. What about some of the other people you opened for, either, superstars or super interesting?
Well, I mean, one comes to mind. I remember we're opening for Rosie O'Donnell in Reno. And I only remember this is that it was a 6,000 seat arena.
Wow.
And I'll never forget is that, how rooms have different characteristics, right? How the laughter comes at the performer. Now, an audience member doesn't think, oh, this is a good room or this is a bad room. But a comedian knows a room like that. I mean, you just know when it's a good room or a bad room. And I remember there was 6,000 people, and I go on stage, and the laugh would start at the back of the hall, and it would just build like a wave coming at you. And I remember being on stage in the beginning going, oh my God, this is going to hurt.
Wow.
And then it would just wash over you. But that was one of the, it was wild. I'll tell you a great story too. As I opened for Sheena Easton at the Carlton Dinner Theater in Bloomington, Minnesota. And Prince came to see Sheena Easton perform.
Wow.
And what was amazing, I didn't realize it till later, is that Prince had a bodyguard. And back in those days, all the wrestlers came out of Minneapolis. That was like the hotbed of wrestling. And this big, giant, very white guy with kind of this long blonde hair was Prince's bodyguard. And I didn't realize until later, years later, it was Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan was Prince's bodyguard. So yeah, it was wild.
I actually got a chance to speak to and had on my show, perhaps other than Hulk Hogan, perhaps one of the most interesting wrestlers of all time, George the Animal Steele.
Yeah, wow. I remember that.
And he told me that he was a school teacher in Detroit, and you didn't see him wrestling all year long because he taught school in Detroit.
Yeah, it's a different
He
time.
only wrestled in the summertime when he was off of school. And there was a time when he was huge. They built him up. He was huge. And I said to him on the show, I said, what was it like walking down that? And the reason I remember this is what you said about that, the sound, just the laughs just coming at you. Mm-hmm. What was it like when you were walking down that pathway to the main stage and the whole place erupted with deafening screams?
Right.
So you're not going to believe what he said to me next.
What?
He said, wait a second, I have to ask George. And the George character stepped in and spoke to me for a while because what he said. So it was, to be like that, we talked about different personalities on stage, off stage. It's show business is really something else.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. One time I went out I watched Letterman was on Carson as a guest, and I was friends with one of Letterman's friends. So I went out and hung out backstage while Dave was on the show. And Dave he was kind to me. We chatted a bit, and I said something to him like came off, and he just went out and sat by Johnny, and he did a stand up from the chair, right? And I remember said to him, I said, "Did you have fun out there?" And he looked at me like I was from Mars. He goes, "It's work." And it was like, "Oh, yeah, you're right. Sorry." You know what I mean? So
Wow.
it was like it was an interesting lesson how how the greats approach it. They're just working, right? It's work. It's not enjoyment. It's not anything else. So yeah, that was a lesson learned right there.
So one of the tough things for me was uh, there was a lot I wasn't getting from my LA experience.
Hmm.
And I'm a big like relationship guy. I've been with the same woman now for 22 years. We've been married
Hmm.
for 15, 16 years. I've adopted a beautiful 16-year-old daughter that we have. So my life has calmed down quite a bit. Where
Right.
out there, it's crazy with relationships. I mean, we could probably do a whole show about what it's like to to be or not to be in a relationship. Most of those guys were never in relationships. I remember Dreesen talking about his kind of relationships when he used to go over to Santa Monica.
Sure.
So
Well, I mean, when you're in show business, I've seen people punch way above their weight, you know, with, it's easy to be on stage because when you're on stage, you're presenting the best part of yourself. And so that's attractive to people. And I would get very quiet. I mean, I remember being on the road, like, you go out as a headliner in a comedy club and, you do an hour, 45 minutes to an hour for the first show, 45 minutes to an hour on the second show. And I remember people would, they'd come by and they'd want to talk with you or hang out with you. But I would just be so tired of talking and be so not that person who they just saw that I remember they just seeing how disappointed they were, right? That they thought they want that guy just to be, hey, blah, 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 but it was like, again, it was the old Letterman. It was work. It was work, right? But you're right. It was hard. I was traveling all the time. I used to travel, at least 3 weeks a month in comedy clubs. And right when I started, comedy clubs became big around the country. There weren't comedy clubs really around the country. And then I started I was lucky. Right when I started to make, get to do TV, there were comedy clubs in Dallas, Oklahoma City, everywhere, right? And you would go, you could make a living, right? And, and I always flew, it wasn't like today where people are driving 10 hours to do comedy. I mean, even when I was an opening act in a comedy club, they'd fly me in and pick me up and put me up. But yeah, it was just different times, but it was very hard to keep relationships. And then I will say this, in LA, I found it hard just to have normal relationships with people. I mean, it was very difficult. It's just one of those kind of places where everybody is kind of looking for what's next.
or what they can get from that next person.
Right. And then I moved to Seattle. One day I just left. I said, I can't take this anymore. And I left and moved to Seattle, which I had always loved performing there. And then all of a sudden I had more normal friends, in essence, let's say, even though I still had great friends in LA. I don't want to, I did have that, but just more regular folk who weren't concerned about, the next joke or the next gig or, jealous of you because you're on TV or getting a spot. You know what I mean? It's like, you could always tell if you did something really cool, your comedy friends, they might say, hey, good for you, but, I'm not sure they meant it. There was a little bit of that kind of element. So I think that's a little prevalent in the whole LA scene. And it's probably showbiz in general. It's just that kind of business.
Tough business. It's an ego-based business, and
Yeah.
everything about it, fame, fortune, look at me,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But but I always thought the best performers always laughed at other comedians. I always saw that. Leno would laugh at other comedians, a few others. And I always thought that it used to be like, if you're not as famous, you think there's X amount of laughs in the world, and that person on stage is taking some of my laughs, right?
wow.
But then it's like, then I realized, wait a minute, great comedians laugh when something is funny. They're not judging it like, why isn't that me? And that was a big lesson for me too, is, hey, be magnanimous, encourage, do the best you can, right? I mean, again, it's very tough, but I always saw that maybe they just had a better sense of themselves, but they were more sure of themselves, but they would laugh at other comedians, where we used to watch comedians and you'd go, you wouldn't even laugh. You go, oh, well, that's funny. Oh yeah, that's funny. And you try to figure out how they did it, right? So that was
That's why you can never have a showcase in front of professionals, because you would die on stage, because it was all producers, directors, and instead of laughing, they go, that's funny.
That was the toughest nights, were the showcase nights, was what they were called. And for people who don't know, you'd have a lot of industry people come to watch the show, and those were the toughest nights. First of all, you're nervous. It's important, And I was lucky. Like when I got the Letterman show, I had car trouble, and I got to the Improv like a minute before my set, and didn't even know I was that I was part of a showcase. I didn't even know. I was just doing like the 9-10 spot.
Oh my God.
So I'm here. So they put me right on stage, and I had, I probably had great energy just from an adrenaline of not wanting to miss my spot. And I did well. And then the next week I get a call from the Letterman show booker say, hey, when do you want to do the show? I said, what? I had no idea. And I said, I'll do it in a month. And they said, okay. So then I just started training. I was like running on the beach in Santa Monica, like Rocky, and I'm doing my little 5-minute set everywhere I could. I did it so many times. I mean, I could have done it in my sleep. But I was always grateful that I didn't know they were there. Otherwise, I would have been nervous.
Oh my God, that's right, for sure. You've mentioned some great moments. Do you have one that's just, oh my God, one of the great moments? And then maybe when you're done with that, what was one of the most disappointing ones? Maybe you could start with the most disappointing moment in your show business career first.
Well, I'm trying to think. I mean, there were so many where you just didn't get the gig, right? Or you come off stage. I mean, and by the way,
just missing out on the sitcom.
Right. And I saw by the way, everybody thinks everybody's great. I saw everybody eat it. I mean, the great ones, I've seen them eat it on stage like nobody's business. So, I mean, I'm trying to think of I can't think of one I did remember one time I had a terrible thing where I was doing this benefit in Westwood, this big giant benefit with all these important people, and a fly. I was about to do this punchline of a bit, and a fly flew right in my mouth. And nobody could see that I had a fly had come up. I mean, you can't see that, but they're waiting for the punchline, and I'm there like that. And that was, that was bad. I think the greatest moment, the first time I did the Letterman show, I was so ready for it. And I remember the feeling, you tape it at 5:30, right? And it's so weird is that I remember I'm leaving Rockefeller Center, and you feel like you're the coolest person in the world. And I remember I had my clothes over my back, how you change clothes. And I remember walking, it was just this wonderful feeling of just, wow, I did something cool. But it's so funny that dissipated. It's amazing how in show business, it's always the next thing. And I remember they stayed at the Berkshire Place. The Letterman show put you up at the Berkshire Place. And there's like a welcoming thing, and there's a bottle of wine. And I'll never forget, I was going to watch the show, and I'm all excited. And I remember I drank the bottle of wine, and I just fell asleep. And I didn't even see myself on TV. But, I mean, that was a nice moment. But that's the weird thing about showbiz, right, is that you're always just, that leaves, and you just got to do it again. It's like if you could go on stage on a Saturday night, which is always the hottest night, and kill, and then you just got to do it again. Right? I mean, you don't really get to savor those. I will say this, the first time, I will say one thing, is that I remember when I first started to make a living, I was offered a gig at the Punchline in San Francisco. And they said, we're going to pay, I was going to be a middle act, $750, which was like $1 million. And I remember I put the phone down, and I was just jumping up and down my apartment. that I was going to make $750 telling jokes. So yeah, it's weird to think about that stuff.
So that was Bobby Slayton's kind of home territory and Robin's home territory. And
Well, Dana Carvey was
Harvey.
so kind to me. I used to open for Dana Carvey, and I used to do the place called I want to say it's called the Holy City Zoo.
Yeah, I got a T-shirt.
And Dana Carvey was this was before he became a star, but he was already like he's the most talented guy I ever saw, Dana Carvey. And I was up there doing my little 15, 20 minutes of, Catholic school jokes and, doing my little stuff. And Dana split the door with me. And you know what I mean? He was so kind.
Wow.
They're all there to see him. Nobody was there to see me. And I remember I was walking out with like, hundreds of dollars in my hands, which again was like millions of dollars. And Dana Carvey was, again, so kind.
Super nice. That's super nice. There's a lot of wonderful, incredible people in the business. And
Sure.
I know you've moved on and you've become a writer and an author. I know you've written a book. Can you tell me about your book?
Yeah, I got it right here. Let me grab one. I wrote a book it's about a trip around the world I took called Around the World in 80 Rounds. And I had this, I was always been a golf nut my whole adult life. That was one of the great things about going to LA was that, man, all this great weather. I just played golf like crazy and I grew to love it. And then when I was living in Seattle, and I was going to St. Andrews in Scotland every year. I began this trek every year to play as much links golf as I could.
Wow. And
one day I was sitting there going, it just popped in my head. I go, where's the southernmost golf course on earth? And I had no clue. And I found out it was Ushuaia, Argentina, the very southern tip of South America. Then I thought, where's the northernmost? And it's Tromsø in Norway, about 15 degrees above the Arctic Circle. And I thought, wow, that'd be cool if somebody traveled from one to the other. So literally within 30 days, I'd sold my condo in Seattle. I put everything I owned in storage, got rid of most stuff, got vaccinated against every disease known to man. And I spent a year traveling from the bottom of South America to the top of Norway. And then I wrote this book called Around the World in 80 Rounds. I didn't even have an agent, but I sat there and wrote the book for a year, got a big time agent, Jane Dystel, who at the time was Barack Obama's agent, so she was.
How did that happen? How'd you get her?
Well, it's so funny is I broke every rule. I bought this giant book, a publishing book that has listed all the agents in it and how to submit stuff. I broke every rule, but I wrote the book first. I just sat there and just said, I'm going to write this book. And I spent, and I had half the money left from the selling my condo. And she had a hobby of golf. They listed the hobbies of the owner of the agency. So I just typed an email. I said, Ms. Dystel, my name is David Wood. I have a manuscript for this book called Around the World in 80 Rounds. I made several appearances on the David Letterman Show. So she writes me back and says, what do you got? I sent her a chapter. She goes, what else you got? I sent her 2 more chapters. She goes, I want to represent it. Next thing I know, it was put up for bid. I think there were, I don't even know, 7 or 8 bids from 20,
Wow.
And I got lucky, and so I sold that, and I became a golf writer. I started going and doing all these golf trips, and now I even do a golf video show called Have Clubs Will Travel. It's on themorningread.com, and I do shows every 2 weeks, and that's been just so much fun. So I feel like I'm back in show business, and so using some of my experience at least.
So any thoughts or feelings about that crazy world of show business? Getting back into it?
Well, now I wish I was, it's like everything. I wish I knew then what I know now. I'm so much more confident and so much more, if I would have been more confident then, I would have done better, right? I think I would have, but I was so naive and green and scared. But if you have that, that confidence, that real, and I can't say I had that, which I have now, right? So now I want to, almost sometimes I wish I was doing stand-up these days. But I'm a morning person anyway, so, I can't stay up late. But, I do think that, and I would love to get back in show business, some kind of capacity. I could write, produce, do things like that. I even owned a production company for a while that made funny corporate training films. that starred Harry Anderson, who was my
Wow.
friend, the judge on Night Court. So yeah, I'm, there's still show business in my blood.
That's nice. Well, this has been spectacular. I've really enjoyed it. Really appreciate the time you spent with me here. It's almost like, kind of picking up where we left off a lot of years ago. You're a great guy. And I'm going to show this to Will. And I hope he'll do the show with me now after seeing you. What a good time we had on this show.
Oh, wonderful. I hope so. Will's a great guy. And so are you, my friend. It's been so wonderful to catch up with you. So thanks so much for listening.
How can people get in touch with you, or where can they find your book?
My book is on Amazon, Amazon.com. It's called Around the World in 80 Rounds. It's available in every, hardback, paperback, audio, Kindle, everything. So go there, Around the World in 80 Rounds by David Wood. And then my golf travel show, Half Clubs Will Travel, is on the Morning Read. It's morningread.com, which is a golf site. So that's where you can find me.
All right. To the guy that introduced me to Diana Ross, I want to thank you for that, and thank you for being on the show. You're watching the Bruce Starr Show. Come back again. We'll have some other great guests. David, baby, great job. I love it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, be well, my friend.
Bye-bye, everybody.